highborn lady flees her arranged marriage and rides into a storm, discovering freedom in the world of science and an unexpected love with a brilliant researcher who values her mind. But when her family faces ruin and her past returns to haunt her, will Eleanor choose duty to her bloodline or loyalty to her awakened heart and intellect? Lady Eleanor Blackwood stood at the edge of Halewood Manor's big ballroom. Her hands, covered in white gloves, were held neatly in front of her. The light from 100 candles made the blue stones at her neck shine. These stones matched both her eyes and the family crest of the Westmorlands, who she would soon marry into. Tonight was her 21st birthday party. After years of learning how to be a proper lady, she was ready to become the future Duchess of Westmoreland. At least, that's what everyone told her. "You look so lovely tonight, Lady Eleanor," said the old Countess as she fixed Eleanor's lace collar. "Lord Westmoreland has not taken his eyes off you since you walked in." Eleanor smiled, but the smile did not reach her eyes. "A lady should always look nice, shouldn't she?" she said in a sweet voice that hid the empty feeling in her chest. From across the big room, Lord Westmoreland stood tall with his perfect blonde hair. He raised his glass to her. Their marriage would join two of England's oldest families. It would make Eleanor's father very happy and secure her place among the most important people in the kingdom. "Remember, child," her father, the Earl of Blackwood, came to her side and spoke quietly. "Tonight's news will make our family's future safe. The Westmorlands are close to the king, and such chances don't come twice in a lifetime." "Yes, father," Eleanor said without thinking. Her eyes drifted to the tall windows where dark storm clouds were starting to gather far away. "I will not let you down." But under her perfect manners and lessons in how to stand, speak languages, and talk without saying anything real, Eleanor had a curious mind. She had secretly read her dead mother's science books and thinking papers, books her father would have burned if he knew she liked such unwomanly things. The music started and Lord Westmoreland walked over and bowed perfectly. "Lady Eleanor, may I have this dance?" "You're very kind, my lord," she said, taking his hand like she had been taught. They moved across the shiny floor with perfect steps. Everyone watched the handsome pair with approving looks. Ellen did everything right, but found herself watching the storm clouds now clearly gathering outside, instead of the man who would soon ask for her hand. In the servants' rooms below, her maid Meredith, the only person who knew about Eleanor's secret reading, was getting her room ready for the night. She didn't know that this night would change both their lives forever. The big moment came like a scene from a play. Glass cups clinked as the Earl of Blackwood called for everyone's attention. His voice was proud. "Lords and ladies, honoured guests, I am very happy to tell you that my daughter, Lady Eleanor Blackwood, will marry Lord James Westmoreland, who will be the next Duke of Westmoreland." People clapped as Lord Westmoreland stepped forward and took Eleanor's hand. The candles made his big diamond ring sparkle, a family treasure worn by duchesses for many years. "Lady Eleanor," he said in a formal voice, "your beauty and good breeding make you the perfect choice to be the future Duchess of Westmoreland. Will you do me the honour of becoming my wife?" All eyes were on Eleanor's face, waiting for her to say yes. But something strange happened inside her at that moment. Perhaps it was the distant sound of thunder that seemed to match the unrest in her heart. "My lord," she began, her voice quiet at first, "you honour me greatly with your offer." A strange silence fell as people sensed she was going to say something unexpected. "However," Eleanor continued, her voice growing stronger, "I find I cannot accept." A shocked gasp went through the ballroom. Lord Westmoreland's face changed from confident to stunned. "I beg your pardon?" he asked. Sure he had heard wrong. "I am sorry," Eleanor said, her heart beating fast under her tight dress. "But I cannot agree to a marriage where my mind and spirit would surely die. I have thought about this carefully and must say no to your kind offer." Her father stepped forward, his face white as paper. "Eleanor, you are upset. Perhaps some air—" "I am perfectly fine, father," she replied clearly, "and I stand by my decision." Lord Westmoreland's face turned hard as ice. "I see. Perhaps Lady Eleanor finds my position not high enough for her goals." His voice was just loud enough for others to hear. "Or perhaps she has some improper interest elsewhere." The whispers started right away, spreading through the crowd like fallen leaves. "How dare you, sir?" Eleanor's voice cut through the whispers. "My decision speaks only to what is in my heart, not to any problem with you or to any other attachment." "Eleanor, stop!" her father ordered, grabbing her arm hard. You will say sorry to Lord Westmoreland right now." But something had broken free inside her, a truth she had kept hidden for too long. "I will not say sorry for being honest, father, not even for you." Lord Westmoreland's jaw got tight. "Perhaps honesty is a luxury best saved for those without family duties," he said coldly. "Your rejection not only insults me but makes people doubt your father's word. I wonder what the king will think about this. Mood swing when he considers your father's request for more mining rights." The Earl's face lost all colour. With those few words, Lord Westmoreland had threatened not just social shame but money troubles too. "Eleanor," her father whispered angrily, "you will change your mind right now." For one long moment, Eleanor stood between the life planned for her and the unknown. Then, with quiet dignity, she took off her family's blue stones and placed them in her father's hand. "I cannot," she said simply, "and I will not burden you with my shame any longer." With perfect posture and measured steps, she walked through the shocked crowd, ignoring the scandalized whispers that followed her. Outside the ballroom, she told a surprise servant to get her maid. "Meredith," she said when her loyal servant came, "pack my travel trunk with only what we can carry on horseback. We leave for my godmother's house within the hour." "My lady?" Meredith's eyes got big. "But the storm is coming." "Yes," Eleanor replied, looking out at the darkening sky, "and we shall ride directly into it." Rain hit Eleanor's face as she and Meredith rode away from Halewood Manor. The wind pulled at her cloak and the thunder was so loud it made her horse jump. But Eleanor held on tight and kept riding toward her godmother's faraway home. "My lady, we should find shelter," Meredith called over the storm. "This rain is too heavy." "We must keep going," Eleanor shouted back. Her fancy party dress was now soaked under her travel cloak. The blue silk that had been made for her big night was turning darker with each drop of rain. "If we stop, they might find us and take me back." They rode through the darkest night Eleanor had ever known. The only light came from quick flashes of lightning that lit up the muddy road ahead. Her hands were cold and stiff on the reins, but she would not turn back. Each mile took her further from the life she had just thrown away. By the time they reached Lady Josephine Thornfield's small but nice house, both women were wet to the bone. Eleanor's hair hung in dark ropes down her back, and she was shaking from cold and tiredness. The old servant who opened the door gasped at the sight of them. "Lady Eleanor, is that you, child?" "Please," Eleanor said, her teeth chattering. "I must see my godmother right away." Lady Josephine Thornfield was not like other rich old ladies. At 72 years old, she lived alone, studied plants, and didn't care what people said about her. She came to the door in a plain dress with her silver hair tied back simply. One look at her soaked, shaking goddaughter told her something big had happened. "Bring them in, Thomas. Hot baths, dry clothes, and tea in the library right away." An hour later, wrapped in a warm robe and sitting by a bright fire, Eleanor told her godmother everything. How she had said no to Lord Westmoreland in front of everyone. How her father had been so angry. How she had given back the family jewels and left. "So you see," Eleanor finished, looking down at her cup, "I have nowhere else to go." Lady Josephine studied Eleanor over her own teacup. "Nowhere else to go? Or nowhere else you wish to go?" Eleanor looked up, surprised. I don't understand." "There is a difference, my dear, between having no choices and making the one choice others don't expect." Lady Josephine's eyes were kind but smart. "You chose to leave rather than marry a man who would cage your mind. Now you must decide what you will do with that freedom." "Freedom?" Eleanor repeated the word like it was in a strange language. "I have lost everything. My family, my home, my place in society. How is that freedom? Because now you may become who you truly are, not who others have told you to be." Lady Josephine got up and walked to a shelf. She took down a book and handed it to Eleanor. "Perhaps you might start here." Eleanor looked at the book's cover. It was a study of star patterns by a famous thinker. "This was my mother's," she whispered, touching the name written inside the cover. "The first of many she left in my keeping," Lady Josephine said. "Catherine knew your father would not approve of such reading for a young lady. She wanted you to have them when the time was right." Tears filled Eleanor's eyes. "She knew I would need them some day." "She hoped you would want them," her godmother corrected gently. "Now get some rest. Tomorrow is the first day of your new life, and I suspect you'll want to begin it with a clear head." The next morning Eleanor woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows. For a moment she didn't remember where she was. Then it all came flooding back. The party, her refusal, the wild ride through the storm. She sat up quickly. What had she done? Her father must be so angry. Lord Westmoreland would be telling everyone about her strange behaviour. All of London society would be talking about nothing else by now. A knock at the door broke into her worried thoughts. Meredith entered, carrying a simple dress. "Good morning, my lady. Lady Josephine thought you might like something more practical to wear today." Eleanor looked at the plain dress with no fancy trim or tight waist. It was nothing like the clothes she was used to. "Thank you, Meredith. Is my godmother awake?" "She's been up for hours, my lady. She's in her garden collecting plant samples." After getting dressed in the simple clothes, which felt strange but nice against her skin, Eleanor went outside. The world looked clean and fresh after the storm. Bright sunlight made the wet grass sparkle, and birds were singing everywhere. She found Lady Josephine kneeling in a patch of flowers, carefully cutting stems and placing them in a basket. Without her tight corset and heavy dress, Eleanor could bend down beside her without trouble. "You look more yourself already," Lady Josephine said, glancing at her, "though I suspect you don't yet know who that self is." "I'm not sure I ever will," Eleanor admitted. "All my life, I've been told exactly who I should be and what I should do. Now I have no idea." "What a wonderful place to start," her godmother said with a smile. "Most people go their whole lives without ever asking that question." She handed Eleanor a small cutting tool. "Here, help me collect these samples. It's good for the mind to work with the hands." That day was the first of many that fell into a new pattern. Eleanor woke each morning without the help of servants, dressed herself in simple clothes, and spent her days learning things she'd never been allowed to learn before. Lady Josephine taught her about plants and how they grow. She showed Eleanor her library full of books on science, thinking, and the world, books that ladies weren't supposed to read. In the afternoons, they would walk for miles along the cliffs near the house talking about ideas instead of gossip. At night, Eleanor would read by the fire, sometimes looking up to find her godmother watching her with a small smile. "You remind me so much of your mother," Lady Josephine would say. "She had the same hunger for knowledge." A month passed this way. Eleanor's skin turned a light golden colour from being outside. Her hands, once perfectly soft and white, now had small calluses from gardening and carrying books. She stopped wearing her hair in fancy styles, instead tying it back simply like her godmother did. Letters came from London, angry ones from her father, shocked ones from her friends, and even one from Lord Westmoreland himself, saying he would forgive her temporary madness if she returned right away. Eleanor read them all, then placed them in a drawer. "Will you answer them?" Meredith asked one day as she watched Eleanor put away another letter. "Not yet," Eleanor said. "I don't know what to say. I'm not the same person who left London, but I don't yet know who I've become." That night, a stronger storm than the one they had ridden through hit the coast. Eleanor stood at her window, watching lightning flash over the wild sea below the cliffs. The power of it didn't scare her now. Instead, she felt something like the storm growing inside her, something wild and free and completely her own. "I won't go back," she whispered to the thunder. "I can't go back to being who I was." The rain lashed against the windows of Thornfield Cottage as Eleanor stared into the dancing flames of the hearth. A soft blanket wrapped around her shoulders kept her warm as she watched the fire leap and crackle. 3 weeks had passed since she and Meredith had arrived at her godmother's home, soaked to the skin and carrying just one small trunk between them. Lady Josephine Thornfield was not like other rich old ladies. At 72, she studied plants and didn't care one bit what people said about her. For nearly 40 years, fancy people had whispered about her strange ways, but she just kept doing as she pleased. When Eleanor had shown up on that stormy night, Lady Josephine had taken her in without asking too many questions, though her sharp eyes seemed to see more than Eleanor had told her. "The tea will get cold, my dear," Lady Josephine said, breaking into Eleanor's thoughts. She sat across from Eleanor, her back straight and her eyes still bright despite her age. Her silver hair was tied in a simple knot at the back of her neck. "I'm sorry, godmother," Eleanor said quietly, reaching for the small cup. "I was thinking about other things." "As you have been since you got here," Lady Josephine noted. "Perhaps now you might tell me what really drove you to my door in such a rush. Not that I mind having you here, but young ladies of your standing don't usually run away from home without a very good reason." Eleanor's fingers tightened around the teacup. I said no to Lord Westmoreland's offer of marriage. Lady Josephine's eyebrows went up just a little. Did you? How refreshing. Refreshing is not how people see it, Eleanor said bitterly. By now I'm sure I'm the subject of every chat from London to Bath. No doubt, her godmother agreed, seeming oddly happy about it. What wonderful freedom that must give you. Eleanor looked up quickly. Freedom? I have shamed my family name, maybe ruined my father's money matters, and made myself unmarriageable. I hardly call that freedom. Lady Josephine put down her cup with a sharp click. My dear girl, you've thrown off the chains of a loveless marriage to a man who cares more about your family line than who you really are. If that is not freedom, I truly don't know what is. Eleanor felt tears coming to her eyes for the first time since that big night. But what will happen to me now? That, her godmother replied with a smile, is completely up to you to decide. Rather exciting, wouldn't you say? The days that followed were like nothing Eleanor had known before. Without having to worry about what people thought, she stopped wearing her tight corset, put on simple dresses that let her move freely, and spent hours walking on the wild cliffs near her godmother's home. The people in the small village nearby were used to Lady Josephine's odd ways, so they hardly raised an eyebrow when her goddaughter showed up looking less than perfect. Each evening Eleanor felt tired from really doing things, not from the hard work of being proper in society. Her cheeks had a real pink colour now instead of the blush she used to put on carefully. She ate her meals in the room full of strange plants her godmother grew, often reading aloud from science books while Lady Josephine took care of her special flowers. But even with these small new freedoms, Eleanor still had bad dreams. She would see her father's angry face, hear the whispers that followed her out of the ballroom, and feel the weight of shame on her shoulders. During one night when she couldn't sleep, she found herself in her godmother's library, running her fingers along the spines of books that ladies weren't supposed to read. Can't sleep? Lady Josephine appeared in the doorway, a candle lighting her worried face. Eleanor shook her head. Every time I close my eyes, I see their faces, judging me, finding me wanting. Then perhaps it's time you found something more worth your attention than the thoughts of people who never truly saw you, her godmother replied. She walked to a cabinet that was always locked and took a small key from her pocket. These books belonged to your mother before she married. She gave them to me to keep safe when she realized your father's views on women learning things. The cabinet door swung open to show dozens of books about big ideas, science books, and journals filled with writing Eleanor knew was her mother's. She had seen that neat small writing on old letters kept in her father's desk. She wanted you to have these when you were ready, Lady Josephine said softly. I believe that time has come. That night marked the true beginning of Eleanor's time alone, not the lonely feeling of being rejected by society, but the rich, deep time of getting to know her own thoughts and the thoughts of great thinkers saved in books. She disappeared into her mother's world of ideas, only coming out for meals and short walks to clear her head. Meredith, watching her mistress with quiet worry, finally spoke up one afternoon as she brought tea to Eleanor's new study space. Begging your pardon, my lady, but this can't go on forever. You've hardly seen sunlight in 2 weeks. Eleanor looked up from her mother's journal, feeling like she was waking from a dream. I'm just making up for years of not being allowed to learn, Meredith. Indeed, my lady, the maid replied firmly, but there's a difference between eating well and eating too much, even of the mind. Lady Josephine has gotten 3 letters from your father demanding you come home. Eleanor's hand tightened on the journal. And what does she plan to tell him? She hasn't told him anything yet, but the world outside these walls keeps going, my lady, whether you pay attention to it or not. That evening, Eleanor stood on the cliffs looking out at the big rolling sea, her hair blowing wild around her face. For weeks she had hidden in books and being alone, but Meredith's words had struck a chord of truth. She could not hide forever. I thought I might find you here, Lady Josephine said, joining her on the windy hill. You have your mother's habit of going to high places when troubled. I don't know who I am anymore, Eleanor admitted, her voice nearly lost in the wind. The person I was trained to be no longer exists, yet I do not know who will take her place. Her godmother's weathered hand covered hers. That, my dear, is the most exciting discovery that lies before you. As the sun set over the wild sea, Eleanor felt something new taking root inside her. Not the perfect, proper feeling she had been taught was right, but something stronger and more real. She did not yet know what shape her life would take, but for the first time the not knowing felt like a beginning rather than an end. The next morning, Eleanor woke early and went to her godmother's study. "I'd like to learn about your work," she said without saying hello first. "Not just reading about plants, but really understanding how you study them." Lady Josephine looked up from her desk, surprised by this sudden change. "May I ask why this sudden interest?" "I have spent weeks reading the thoughts of others," Eleanor explained. "Now I wish to learn how to have thoughts of my own. You have written many papers for science journals, even though no one would teach you because you're a woman. I want to know how you did that." A slow smile spread across Lady Josephine's face. "Then we shall begin right after breakfast. Wear your oldest dress. Science is often a messy business." That afternoon found Eleanor in the garden, her hands deep in soil as she helped her godmother dig up plant samples. Her once perfect fingernails were now ringed with dirt, but she didn't mind. There was something satisfying about working with living things, about understanding how they grew and changed. "Your mother would be proud," Lady Josephine said as they catalogued their findings. "She always believed you had a fine mind behind all those society manners." "Did she regret marrying my father?" Eleanor asked. The question she had been afraid to ask for weeks. "Never," Lady Josephine replied firmly, "for it brought her you. But she made sure you would have chances she did not." As the sun set that evening, Eleanor sat in her room and wrote in a new journal, not reading her mother's thoughts now, but writing down her own. The words came slowly at first, then faster as she let her true self speak for the first time. "I am not who they tried to make me," she wrote as the candle burned low. "I am something new, something of my own making, and though I don't yet know exactly who that is, I find I am eager to discover her." Outside her window the stars came out one by one, shining down on the path she was just beginning to walk. It would not be an easy road, but for the first time since that stormy night, Eleanor felt ready to face whatever lay ahead. The autumn days grew shorter as Eleanor spent more and more time learning from her godmother. Lady Josephine's library was bigger than most women were allowed to have, and people talked about it behind her back. But Eleanor didn't care about that anymore. The room full of books became her favourite place, a space where her mind could grow without anyone telling her to stop. Eleanor moved from books about big ideas to books about nature, from star studies to how governments work. She read everything she could get her hands on, like someone who had been hungry for a long time suddenly finding a feast. She filled notebook after notebook with her thoughts and questions. "You read like the books might disappear by morning," Lady Josephine said one evening, finding Eleanor surrounded by open volumes and filled notebooks. "Perhaps they will," Eleanor replied without looking up. "Such learning has been kept from me all my life. I worry it might be taken away again." Lady Josephine sat down across from her goddaughter. "Knowledge once gained cannot be taken away, Eleanor. It becomes part of you, changing how you see the world in ways that can never be undone." Eleanor finally looked up. "Is that why my father kept me from learning these things? Because he was afraid of how it might change me?" "Men like your father fear what they cannot control," Lady Josephine said simply, "and nothing is harder to control than a woman who can think for herself." Their talk might have gone on, but Meredith came in carrying a letter on a silver tray. "From London, my lady, brought by special messenger." Eleanor took the letter with worry, seeing Lord Westmoreland's seal. She broke it open and read quickly, her face growing darker. "What is it?" Lady Josephine asked. "Lord Westmoreland writes that he is ready to forgive my moment of madness and asked me to marry him again, if I come back to London right away and say sorry in public for my bad behaviour." Eleanor's voice grew more upset as she read. "He says we should tell everyone I had a nervous problem brought on by female feelings, overtaxed by the excitement of the engagement." Lady Josephine made an unladylike snort. "How very generous of him. He also says that my father's money troubles have gotten worse since I left, and that only the Westmoreland connection can save the family's good name." Eleanor's hands shook a little. "He makes himself sound like my saviour." "And how do you plan to answer?" her godmother asked. Eleanor looked at the letter for a long moment before throwing it into the fire. "I don't." Lady Josephine smiled approvingly. "A perfect reply." That night, Eleanor dreamed of storms. Not the storm she had ridden through to reach Thornfield Cottage, but a storm of her own making, wild and powerful. She woke feeling strangely energized, and for the first time since coming to stay with her godmother, she got up before breakfast to seek Lady Josephine out. She found her godmother in the glass room where she kept her special plants, carefully looking at a rare flower through a magnifying glass. "Godmother," Eleanor began right away, "I want to learn about your work, not just to read about plants, but to understand how you study them." Lady Josephine studied her goddaughter thoughtfully. "May I ask why this sudden interest?" "I have spent weeks taking in the thoughts of others," Eleanor explained. "Now I want to learn how to form my own ideas. You have published many papers in science journals despite not being allowed formal education because you're a woman. I want to know how you did this." A slow smile spread across Lady Josephine's face. "Then we shall begin right after breakfast. Wear your oldest dress. Science is often a messy business." The weeks that followed changed Eleanor in ways even more basic than her first rebellion had done. Under Lady Josephine's guidance, she learned to sort plants into groups, to prepare samples for keeping, and to write down what she saw with scientific care. Her hands, once prized for being soft and white, became marked with soil and plant stains. Her mind, once trained to remember silly social details, now kept track of the complex structures of ferns and fungi. "You show remarkable skill," Lady Josephine commented one afternoon as they studied samples collected during a morning walk. "Your mother would be proud." "Was she also interested in plants?" Eleanor asked, carefully mounting a fern sample on paper. "Catherine's passion was the stars," Lady Josephine replied, her voice softening with memory. "We spent countless nights on this very land charting the skies, while your grandfather thought we were attending a series of balls in Bath." She chuckled. "Your mother once said she found more truth in the movements of far-off planets than in the empty compliments of eager suitors." Eleanor looked up in surprise. "Yet she married my father." Lady Josephine's expression grew thoughtful. "Love, my dear, can be as unpredictable as science is methodical. Your mother believed she could keep up her thinking pursuits within marriage. Unfortunately, your father proved less open-minded than she had hoped." "Did she regret her choice?" Eleanor asked quietly. "Never," Lady Josephine replied firmly, "for it brought her you, but she was determined you would have choices she did not." That evening a letter arrived bearing the royal seal. Lady Josephine opened it with clear delight. "Excellent news," she announced. "The Royal Botanical Society has accepted my paper on how alpine plants adapt. They have invited me to present my findings next month, and they specifically mention that I may bring my research assistant." She looked meaningfully at Eleanor. "It seems your careful drawings have caught their attention." "But the society does not allow women to attend its meetings," Eleanor protested. "Not officially, no," Lady Josephine agreed with a mischievous smile. "However, they have long been willing to make exceptions for those whose work they cannot ignore, and as the king's second cousin, however distant and female, I have certain rights they dare not refuse." For the first time since fleeing London, Eleanor felt a spark of real excitement at the thought of going back into society, albeit a very different society than the one she had left behind. "What shall I wear?" she wondered aloud, looking down at her soil-stained hands. "Something suitable for a serious scientist," Lady Josephine replied with a wink, though perhaps with slightly fewer plant samples stuck to the hemline. As they got ready for their journey to London, Eleanor found herself spending long hours in the library, not only studying plants but revisiting her mother's journals. One passage in particular caught her attention. "Society insists a woman must choose between mind and love, between scholarly pursuit and family duty. I reject this false choice. The mind that seeks understanding of the stars is equally capable of understanding the human heart. One day, Eleanor will know this truth." Eleanor closed the journal gently, a tear sliding down her cheek. "I begin to understand, Mother," she whispered. "I truly do." On a bright morning 2 weeks later, Eleanor stood in front of the mirror in her room at Lady Josephine's London house. The woman who looked back at her was not the perfect society lady who had fled months ago. Her face had a healthy glow from spending time outdoors, not from carefully applied makeup. Her hands showed the marks of real work, and her eyes held a confidence that came from within, not from knowing she looked pretty. "You look different, my lady," Meredith said, as she helped Eleanor into a simple but elegant blue dress for the society meeting. "Do I?" Eleanor asked, though she could see the changes herself. "Yes, my lady, not just on the outside, though that's changed too." Meredith stepped back to look at her mistress. "You stand taller now, you look people in the eye differently, and if I may be so bold, you seem happy." Eleanor smiled at her loyal maid. I believe I am Meredith. For perhaps the first time since my mother died, I feel like I'm becoming who I was meant to be, not who everyone told me to be. As they left for the Royal Botanical Society's Great Hall, Eleanor felt a mix of nerves and excitement. She would be entering a world her mother had loved but had been forced to experience only in secret. And while Eleanor knew there would be challenges ahead, that many would not accept a woman's presence in such scholarly settings, she felt ready to face them. "Remember," Lady Josephine said as their carriage approached the imposing building, "you enter not as an apology, but as a right. Your mind belongs there as much as any man's." Eleanor nodded, touching the small notebook in her pocket where she had recorded her own observations, not just copied the thoughts of others. For the first time, she had something of her own to contribute. "I'm ready," she said, and she truly was. The Royal Botanical Society's Great Hall buzzed with the voices of learned men as Eleanor followed Lady Josephine through the big oak doors. She tried to stay calm on the outside, but her heart beat fast. Though London was just streets away from this place of learning where they now stood, it felt worlds apart from the fancy ballrooms where she had once been the season's most sought-after young lady. "Stand up straight, my dear," Lady Josephine said quietly. "You enter not as Lady Eleanor looking for approval, but as a botanist who deserves respect." Eleanor lifted her chin, drawing strength from the folder of plant drawings tucked under her arm. These pictures showed 3 months of careful study and fieldwork. Her simple blue dress had none of the frills that had once filled her closet, and her hair was arranged in a practical style that she could fix herself without Meredith's help. "Lady Josephine," a white-haired man approached, bowing with clear respect. "We are honoured by your presence. Your paper on alpine adaptation has caused quite a stir among our alpine experts. Professor Hammond, may I present my research assistant and goddaughter?" "Miss Eleanor Blackwood," Lady Josephine replied, leaving out Eleanor's title of lady, a small but important choice. The professor's eyebrows went up slightly, but he offered a respectful bow. "Miss Blackwood, Lady Josephine speaks highly of your observational skills and drawing techniques. I look forward to seeing your work." "You are most kind, Professor," Eleanor replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "It has been my great joy to document such fascinating specimens." As Lady Josephine was drawn in to talk with other society members, Eleanor found herself alone at the edge of the gathering. She used the time to study the display exhibits, truly fascinated by specimens collected from across the empire. "The Dendrobium noble from the Himalayan foothills," a deep voice observed beside her as she examined an orchid drawing. "Remarkable toughness in a species so delicate in appearance." Eleanor turned to find herself facing a tall man whose scholarly clothes could not hide his military bearing. His skin, tanned by exposure to foreign suns, marked him as recently returned from abroad. "Indeed," she replied, appreciating his correct identification. "Though I find the adaptive qualities of the high-altitude varieties even more fascinating, the illustration fails to capture the structural changes of the root system." The stranger's eyes, a penetrating grey that reminded Eleanor of storm clouds, registered pleasant surprise. "You speak as one who has studied such adaptations firsthand." "Only through Lady Josephine Thornfield's exceptional specimens and guidance," Eleanor admitted. "I am but a beginner in the botanical sciences." "A remarkably well-informed beginner," he countered with a slight smile. "Forgive my boldness, but you must be Miss Blackwood." Lady Josephine mentioned her assistant's particular interest in structural adaptations to environmental stress. Eleanor felt a curious mix of pride and uncertainty at being recognised for her scientific interest rather than her social position. "You have me at a disadvantage, sir. Dr. Alexander Halloway," he introduced himself with a bow, "recently returned from an expedition to India on behalf of the Society. I had the honour of writing to Lady Josephine regarding some unusual specimens discovered in the northern provinces." Recognition dawned. "The variant orchid species from Kashmir. We received your preserved samples last month. The structural modifications to the stamens were most irregular. Lady Josephine believes they represent an entirely new subspecies." Dr. Halloway's expression warmed. "Precisely. I've brought additional specimens and extensive field notes for Lady Josephine's review. Perhaps you might—" He hesitated, seemingly reconsidering his words. "That is, if it wouldn't be presumptuous, I would value your insights as well, given your evident understanding of the subject." Before Eleanor could respond, the proceedings were called to order, and Lady Josephine beckoned her to join the presentation preparations. With a brief nod to Dr. Halloway, she moved to her godmother's side, aware of a strange lightness in her step that had nothing to do with botany. Lady Josephine's presentation proved the highlight of the society's gathering. Her thorough research, complemented by Eleanor's detailed illustrations, prompted extensive discussion among the assembled scientists. Eleanor found herself drawn into the scholarly debate, initially hesitant but growing more confident as her observations were met with thoughtful consideration rather than dismissal. "You performed admirably," Lady Josephine commented as they departed the society halls. "Professor Hammond has invited us to return for next month's presentation on tropical propagation methods. Dr. Halloway will be the featured speaker." Eleanor felt a flush rise to her cheeks. "His work on adaptive mechanisms appears most insightful." "Indeed," her godmother replied with a knowing smile. "Alexander Halloway is considered something of a revolutionary in botanical classification. Educated at Edinburgh rather than Oxford or Cambridge, and with unconventional views on both science and society." She paused meaningfully. "He has declined no fewer than 3 appointments to prestigious university positions in favour of field research. A dedication to truth over advancement," Eleanor observed. "A rare quality." "Rarer still is his respect for female intellect," Lady Josephine added casually. "He cited my work extensively in his book on cross-continental species migration, despite considerable criticism from more traditional quarters." As their carriage wound through London streets, Eleanor found her gaze drawn to the familiar houses of Mayfair. Somewhere behind those elegant windows, the society that had once defined her existence continued its endless cycle of shallow pleasantries and strategic alliances. "Do you miss it?" Lady Josephine asked softly, following her goddaughter's gaze. Eleanor considered the question carefully. "I miss certain individuals, my childhood friends, some of the servants. But the life itself?" She shook her head. "It feels like remembering a role I once played in a theatrical production. Familiar, but no longer mine." Their scientific engagements required a 2-week stay in London, during which Eleanor's presence did not go unnoticed. Whispers followed her on the occasion she accompanied Lady Josephine to bookshops or the British Museum, whispers that spoke of disgrace, of mental instability, of her father's declining health attributed to her shameful behaviour. "You must not let their words touch you," Lady Josephine counselled, after a particularly difficult encounter with a former acquaintance who had cut Eleanor directly on the museum steps. "I do not regret my choices," Eleanor insisted, though her voice shook slightly. "Yet I cannot help but wonder if there might have been a way to pursue my own path without causing such pain to others. The systems that punish honesty bear the responsibility for such pain," her godmother replied firmly, "not those who dare speak truth." 3 days before their planned return to Thornfield Cottage, Eleanor's relative peace was shattered by an unexpected visitor. She was examining a botanical sample in Lady Josephine's rented study when Meredith entered, her expression troubled. "Lord Westmoreland requests an immediate audience, my lady," the maid announced with evident disapproval. Eleanor's hand froze over the specimen. "Did you tell him Lady Josephine is out?" "I did, my lady. He insists the matter concerns you personally and cannot wait." After thinking for a moment, Eleanor nodded. "Show him in, but stay close by, Meredith." Lord Westmoreland entered like a man used to commanding any space he occupied. His perfect clothes and confident bearing remained unchanged, though his eyes narrowed slightly at the sight of Eleanor in her simple gown, her hands bearing the unmistakable stains of scientific work. "Lady Eleanor," he began without waiting for her greeting, "your continued absence from society has become unacceptable. Your father's health gets worse daily, and the family name suffers irreparable damage with each passing week." "Good afternoon, Lord Westmoreland," Eleanor replied coolly. "While I regret any distress my father experiences, I must point out that his health and our family's reputation are not my responsibility to maintain through personal sacrifice." His expression hardened. "Is that what you call it? Sacrifice? To be offered the position of Duchess with all its privileges and security?" "To surrender my mind and will in exchange for a title," Eleanor countered. "Yes, I consider that too great a sacrifice." Lord Westmoreland's gaze swept over the botanical implements and scientific texts scattered across the study. "So instead, you choose this peculiar existence, playing at scholarship like a child with toys. His tone dripped with condescension. "Do you imagine these scientific gentlemen take you seriously? They humour an eccentric noblewoman and her protégé out of political expediency, nothing more." The words struck close to Eleanor's insecurities, but she maintained her composure. "Your assessment of my situation reflects your limitations, not mine, Lord Westmoreland." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I am prepared, despite everything, to renew my offer. Your father's debts grow daily. The estate approaches ruin. Only the Westmoreland connection can save your family's position." "You speak of connection and position," Eleanor observed, "but never of affection or compatibility." "Affection?" he scoffed. "A girlish fancy that pales beside practical considerations. What future do you envision here? Spinsterhood, scientific dabbling, and eventual obscurity." Before Eleanor could respond, a knock at the door heralded Meredith's return. "Dr. Halloway to see you, my lady." "Regarding the cashmere specimens." Lord Westmoreland's expression darkened at the interruption. "Send him away. Lady Eleanor is otherwise engaged." "It is not your place to dismiss my visitors, Lord Westmoreland," Eleanor stated firmly. "Meredith, please show Dr. Halloway in." Alexander Halloway entered with a specimen case in hand, his expression shifting from scholarly anticipation to cautious assessment as he sensed the tense atmosphere. "Forgive me, Miss Blackwood. I did not realize you had a prior engagement," he said, preparing to leave. "Not at all, Dr. Halloway," Eleanor replied with deliberate warmth. Lord Westmoreland was just departing. Westmoreland drew himself up rigidly. "This discussion is not over, Lady Eleanor. Your father expects your return by week's end." With a curt nod that deliberately excluded Dr. Halloway, he strode from the room. In the silence that followed, Alexander set down his specimen case carefully. "I appear to have arrived at an inopportune moment. Please accept my apologies." "On the contrary," Eleanor replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "Your timing could not have been more fortunate. Lord Westmoreland occasionally requires reminding that my decisions are no longer subject to his approval." Alexander's gaze held hers for a moment, before he nodded with evident understanding. "In that case, perhaps the cashmere orchid variations might provide a more pleasant topic of discussion. I've discovered structural anomalies in the newest specimens that contradict conventional classification." As they bent their heads over the botanical samples, Eleanor felt a wave of gratitude for this man who offered intellectual engagement rather than judgment, who saw her mind rather than her marital status or social position. For the first time since her dramatic departure from Halewood Manor, she felt not merely the absence of constraint, but the presence of possibility. The autumn leaves blazed gold and red against the grey London sky as Eleanor and Dr. Halloway, Alexander, as she'd come to call him in the 2 weeks since their first meeting, walked through the British Museum's new botanical garden. What had begun as talks about the cashmere specimens had grown into regular conversations that went far beyond botany, touching on books, big ideas, and their journeys to scientific pursuit. "You must find London society terribly restricting after your years abroad," Eleanor said, as they stopped before a carefully grown display of Asian plants. Alexander smiled slightly. "Society exists wherever people gather, with its own rules and expectations. The tribal elders of the Himalayan villages were just as concerned with proper ways of doing things as any duchess at a fancy ball, though perhaps with better reasons for their traditions." "How so?" Eleanor asked, truly curious. "Their customs grew from generations of hard-won survival knowledge," he explained, his face thoughtful. "When to plant, how to build, whom to trust, matters of life and death rather than fashion and status. Yet even there, I met minds that questioned, that sought to improve rather than merely preserve." Eleanor thought about this as they continued their walk. "Did you find it hard to return to England after seeing such different ways of living?" "Very much so," he admitted. "I returned in body, but part of my mind remains elsewhere, seeing our customs through the lens of what I've witnessed abroad." He paused before adding quietly, "Few here understand that feeling of being in two worlds at once." "To stand within a society while seeing it from outside," Eleanor murmured. "Yes, I believe I understand something of that double vision now." Their eyes met in shared recognition, a moment of connection that went beyond their scientific work. Alexander cleared his throat, gesturing toward a nearby greenhouse. "I've arranged for us to examine the Royal Collection's rare specimen archive," he said, including several varieties documented by your godmother in her earlier expeditions. The greenhouse keeper, recognizing Dr. Halloway, let them into a private section not usually open to visitors. Row upon row of carefully maintained plants stretched before them, a living library of botanical knowledge. This particular orchid, Alexander said, leading Eleanor to a delicate purple bloom, was discovered by Lady Josephine in the mountains of Peru almost 40 years ago. It was initially dismissed as a mere variant of a known species until she proved its unique reproductive mechanism. Eleanor studied the plant with newfound appreciation. She never mentioned this discovery. Perhaps because the credit was initially given to her male travelling companion, Alexander replied with a hint of indignation. Only years later was the record corrected, after she published her detailed field notes. Yet she continued her work despite such injustices, Eleanor observed. As have many remarkable women throughout scientific history, he agreed, though too often their contributions remain hidden or attributed to others. As they moved through the collection, Alexander shared similar stories of female botanists, stargazers, and mathematicians whose work had shaped his understanding while receiving little public recognition. His clear respect for these women's intellectual achievements moved Eleanor deeply. Their botanical discussions led them to the reading room of the British Library several days later, where ancient plant books and contemporary scientific journals lay open between them on a broad oak table. What had begun as research evolved into hours of animated conversation, their voices occasionally drawing gentle scolding from the librarian. "I'm sorry," Eleanor whispered after one such reminder. "I find I've quite forgotten where we are." "As have I," Alexander confessed, his gaze lingering on her face, now animated with intellectual passion, rather than the practiced charm she'd once perfected. "You speak of these theories as though you've studied them all your life. I've merely had the freedom to explore them these past months," she replied. "Though in truth, I feel as though I am remembering rather than learning, as if this knowledge waited dormant within me, requiring only opportunity to flourish. Like seeds requiring the right conditions to germinate," he suggested, the botanical metaphor drawing a smile from her. "Precisely so." Her expression turned thoughtful. "I wonder how many minds lie fallow for want of proper cultivation." Alexander's hand moved unconsciously toward hers before he caught himself, withdrawing with a slight flush. "Far too many, I fear, particularly among those society deems unsuitable for intellectual pursuit." The moment of near contact hung between them, charged with unspoken possibility. Their scholarly outings continued in the days that followed, expanding beyond London's institutions to the Royal Botanical Gardens at Kew. Walking among exotic specimens collected from across the empire, Eleanor found herself sharing memories of her childhood fascination with her mother's books, her secret reading beneath bed covers by candlelight, and her growing sense of suffocation as she approached marriageable age. Alexander, in turn, spoke of his father's disappointment at his choice of botany over law, his years of financial struggle before securing his first expedition grant, and his gradual discovery that scientific truth mattered more to him than social advancement. "We are both disappointments to our families," Eleanor observed, with unexpected lightness as they sat on a stone bench overlooking a tranquil pond. "Perhaps," Alexander agreed, "or perhaps we're simply pioneers of a different path, one that values authentic purpose over prescribed expectation." The afternoon light caught the auburn highlights in Eleanor's hair, loosened from its pins by the autumn breeze. Alexander's gaze lingered on her profile, his expression reflecting a deepening admiration that extended far beyond scholarly respect. "I've received an invitation that I hope might interest you," he said after a moment. The Geographical Society hosts a lecture next week on botanical discoveries from the Amazon basin. The speaker, Professor Ramsey, has controversial theories on cross-pollination that directly relate to our Kashmir orchid studies. "I should like that very much," Eleanor replied, then hesitated, "though I wonder if my presence might prove uncomfortable for you. Lord Westmoreland's cousin sits on the Society's board, and my reputation in certain circles remains problematic." Alexander's expression hardened slightly. "If your intellectual curiosity causes discomfort to those who would limit knowledge based on gender or social convention, then perhaps discomfort is precisely what they require," his voice softened. "Besides, I find I've grown quite accustomed to your companionship during these outings. Their absence would diminish the experience considerably." The simple honesty of his statement touched Eleanor more deeply than any formal compliment she had received in her former life. "Then I shall be honoured to accompany you, controversial reputation notwithstanding." The evening of the lecture arrived with unexpected complications. A heavy rain had settled over London, transforming elegant streets into treacherous expanses of mud and standing water. The hired carriage Lady Josephine had arranged was significantly delayed, threatening Eleanor's arrival at the appointed time. "Perhaps we should send our regrets," Lady Josephine suggested as they waited in the entrance hall. Eleanor dressed in her finest day dress, still simpler than her former wardrobe but more formal than her usual scientific attire. "Dr. Holloway will be waiting," Eleanor replied, her concern evident, "and Professor Ramsay's theories are directly relevant to our current work." A knock at the door interrupted their talk. Meredith opened it to reveal Alexander himself, rain-spattered but smiling, a large umbrella in hand. "I thought the weather might prove challenging," he explained, "and took the liberty of securing transportation. The carriage awaits just beyond the gate." Lady Josephine's eyes twinkled with approval. "How remarkably thoughtful, Dr. Holloway. Though I fear I must beg off. My rheumatism suggests an evening by the fire would be wiser." She turned to Eleanor before her goddaughter could protest. "Meredith shall accompany you as propriety demands naturally." The lecture proved every bit as stimulating as Alexander had promised. Professor Ramsay's theories on environmental adaptation sparked vigorous debate among the assembled scientists, with Eleanor finding herself drawn into conversation with several prominent botanists who, after initial surprise at her contributions, engaged with her observations with genuine interest. "You've made quite an impression," Alexander noted as they awaited their carriage afterward, the rain having finally subsided to a gentle mist. "Professor Winters has invited you to review his spore collection, a privilege he rarely extends even to established colleagues." "They speak to me as a fellow scientist rather than a curiosity," Eleanor marvelled. "I had not expected such ready acceptance." "True scholarship values substance over convention," Alexander replied, "though I confess, not all members of our scientific community rise to that standard." He glanced toward a group of older gentlemen who had pointedly avoided their company throughout the evening. Eleanor followed his gaze, recognizing Lord Harrington among them, her father's longtime associate and Lord Westmoreland's uncle. "Some battles require generations to win," she observed philosophically. Their carriage journey back to Lady Josephine's rented townhouse proceeded in comfortable conversation, with Meredith maintaining a discreet presence by the opposite window. As they discussed the lecture's implications for their own research, Eleanor became aware of a subtle shift in the atmosphere between them, a deepening connection that transcended intellectual compatibility. When they arrived, Alexander helped her from the carriage with careful courtesy. "Might I call tomorrow to continue our discussion of Professor Ramsay's propagation theories?" he asked, his hand lingering on hers a moment longer than strictly necessary. "I should like that very much," Eleanor replied softly. That night, alone in her chamber, Eleanor found herself standing before the mirror, studying her reflection with new awareness. The woman who gazed back bore little resemblance to the polished society debutante who had fled London months ago. Her cheeks held the healthy flush of regular outdoor activity. Her eyes sparkled with intellectual engagement rather than practiced charm, and her hands, no longer pristinely white, showed the honourable marks of scientific inquiry. "You look happy, my lady," Meredith observed, as she entered with a pot of evening tea. "Truly happy, if you'll pardon my saying so." Eleanor turned from the mirror with a thoughtful smile. "I believe I am, Meredith. For perhaps the first time in my life." The maid nodded approvingly as she poured the tea. "Dr. Holloway seems a good man, respectful-like, but not distant, interested in what you have to say." "He values minds over titles," Eleanor replied, accepting the cup. "A rare quality among gentlemen." "Rarer still is a gentleman who looks at a lady the way he looks at you," Meredith observed with the frankness of long service. "If you'll forgive my boldness," Eleanor felt warmth rise to her cheeks. "You presume a great deal." "Perhaps," Meredith conceded with a knowing smile. "But I've dressed you for too many years not to recognize the difference between polite interest and something deeper. And if I may be so bold, my lady, the feeling appears mutual." Left alone with her thoughts, Eleanor found herself thinking not only about her growing attachment to Alexander she could no longer deny, but also the unexpected path her life had taken. Had she accepted Lord Westmoreland's proposal, She would now be planning an elaborate Christmas ball as the new Duchess, overseeing many servants and navigating complex social rules with practiced precision. Instead, she spent her days examining botanical specimens, debating scientific theories, and experiencing the thrill of intellectual discovery. Her circle had shrunk from hundreds of fashionable acquaintances to a handful of genuine connections. Her future, once carefully planned, now stretched before her uncharted but infinitely more compelling. The question that lingered as she drifted towards sleep was whether this newfound path might accommodate not only scholarly pursuit, but also the tender feelings taking root in her heart, feelings as unexpected as they were undeniable. The carriage rattled over icy cobblestones, carrying Eleanor back toward the heart of Mayfair society, a world she'd fled 4 months earlier. Lady Josephine sat beside her, dressed in bright green velvet despite her repeated claims that she had long since abandoned the follies of fashion. "Must we attend at all?" Eleanor asked, adjusting her gloves nervously. "The Botanical Society dinner would have been far more pleasant." "Sometimes, my dear, one must face the past to truly embrace the future," her godmother replied. "Besides, Lady Harwick specifically requested your presence, and she remains one of the few voices of reason among the peerage. Her scientific patronage has advanced women's education considerably." Eleanor nodded reluctantly. Lady Harwick's annual winter reception was indeed a more intellectual gathering than most society functions, attracting artists, scientists, and forward-thinking nobility alongside traditional aristocracy. Still, it would mark Eleanor's first formal re-entry into the social world that had witnessed her dramatic rejection of Lord Westmoreland. "Dr. Halloway mentioned he might attend as well," Lady Josephine added casually. Lady Harwick's late husband was his early patron. Eleanor felt her heart beat faster at the mention of Alexander, whose daily visits had become the centre of her London existence. Their shared research on the Kashmir orchids had evolved into a partnership that extended beyond botany to a deeper understanding of each other's minds and principles. "I believe I spotted him earlier," Lady Josephine continued, peering through the carriage window as they approached Lady Harwick's brightly lit townhouse. "Yes, there he is, awaiting our arrival. How very gallant." Indeed, Alexander stood at the foot of the stairs, handsomely dressed in evening clothes that, while perfect, lacked the showy flourishes favoured by society gentlemen. His face brightened visibly as the carriage door opened and Eleanor emerged. "Miss Blackwood, Lady Josephine," he greeted them with a bow. "May I escort you inside? The crowd appears rather daunting." Eleanor accepted his offered arm gratefully, drawing strength from his steady presence as they ascended the steps toward the brightly lit entrance. Inside, the assembled company represented a curious blend of traditional aristocracy and intellectual society, duchesses talking with astronomers, earls debating painters, and diplomats engaging with natural philosophers. Conversation faltered briefly as Eleanor entered. Her name whispered among those who recognized the former Lady Eleanor Blackwood in her simpler but elegant attire. She felt the weight of curious stares and judgmental assessments, but Alexander's reassuring presence beside her helped her maintain her composure. Lady Harwick, a formidable widow whose scientific salon had introduced numerous female scholars to influential patrons, swept forward to greet them. "Lady Josephine, delightful as always, and this must be your goddaughter whose botanical illustrations have caused such a stir at the society. Welcome, my dear." Her warm reception set the tone for others to follow, and Eleanor soon found herself engaged in surprisingly pleasant conversation with several of Lady Harwick's scientifically inclined guests. Alexander remained nearby, occasionally joining their discussions but tactfully allowing Eleanor to navigate her social re-emergence independently. "Your work on adaptive mechanisms in high-altitude flora is most impressive," an elderly professor commented. "Have you considered submitting a paper to the Royal Society's journal? I sit on the editorial board and would be pleased to review it." Before Eleanor could respond, a familiar voice interjected from behind her. "How charitable of you, Professor, to encourage such amateur enthusiasm." Eleanor turned to find Lord Westmoreland regarding her with cold assessment, his perfect appearance marred only by the tightness around his mouth. "Lady Eleanor," he greeted her with formal correctness. "What an unexpected pleasure to find you once again in civilized company." "Lord Westmoreland," she acknowledged with a composure that surprised even herself. "I trust you are well." "Considerably better than your father, I regret to say," he replied with calculated concern. His health continues to decline in your absence. The physicians recommend Swiss air, but the expense proves prohibitive given the estate's current difficulties. The deliberately cruel reference to her father's health struck home, but Eleanor maintained her dignified expression. I was unaware his condition had worsened. Thank you for informing me. Alexander, sensing the tension, stepped to her side. Miss Blackwood, Lady Hurwick was hoping you might discuss your illustrations with the Countess of Pembroke, who shares your interest in botanical documentation. Lord Westmoreland's gaze shifted to Alexander, his assessment swift and dismissive. I don't believe we've been introduced, sir. Doctor Alexander Halloway, he replied evenly, of the Royal Botanical Society. Ah, a man of science rather than lineage, Westmoreland observed with subtle disdain. How progressive of Lady Hurwick to extend her invitation so democratically. Eleanor felt anger rise on Alexander's behalf, but he merely smiled. Indeed. Merit rather than inheritance has always been her criterion for intellectual society. If you'll excuse us, Lord Westmoreland, the Countess awaits. As Alexander guided her away, Eleanor whispered, Thank you for the timely intervention. I find I have limited patience for those who mistake privilege for superiority, he replied quietly, though I apologize if my presence complicates your social standing further. On the contrary, she assured him, your company is the only thing making this evening bearable. The evening progressed with unexpected pleasantness, as Eleanor found herself welcomed by the more intellectually inclined members of society while the traditional aristocracy maintained a polite but distinct distance. She was engaged in conversation with a female astronomer when Meredith appeared at her elbow. Forgive the interruption, my lady, the maid murmured, but your father has arrived and requests an immediate private audience. Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. My father? Here? Yes, my lady. He awaits you in Lady Hurwick's study. With trepidation, Eleanor made her excuses and followed Meredith through the crowded reception rooms to a smaller chamber at the back of the house. There, standing by the fireplace with the aid of a walking stick, stood the Earl of Blackwood, noticeably thinner and greyer than when she had last seen him. Father, she greeted him cautiously. He turned, his expression unreadable. Eleanor, you look changed. As to you, sir, I was unaware of the extent of your illness. Would it have mattered? He asked sharply. You abandoned your family and duties without a backward glance. Eleanor summoned her courage. I chose a different path than the one you prescribed. That is not abandonment, but independence. Independence? He scoffed. Is that what you call living as your godmother's charity case while our family name is dragged through society's mud? While our estate crumbles for want of the connection your marriage would have secured? I never sought to harm you or our family name, Eleanor replied steadily. Only to live truthfully rather than sacrifice myself to uphold appearances. Sacrifice? His voice rose slightly. Every woman of quality makes the same sacrifice for her family's advancement. Your mother understood her duty. Did she? Eleanor challenged, emboldened by months of reading her mother's private journals. Or did she simply lack the option to choose otherwise? The world changes, father. Women begin to recognize that our minds are not inferior to men's, merely differently trained. The Earl's face flushed with anger. I did not come to debate philosophy with my own daughter. I came to inform you that Lord Westmoreland, despite your unconscionable behaviour, has agreed to renew his offer, provided you return home immediately and publicly acknowledge your nervous episode as a temporary affliction now cured. Eleanor stared at him in disbelief. You cannot seriously believe I would accept such terms. I believe you will do your duty as a Blackwood, he replied coldly. Our estate mortgages are called in at quarter's end. Without the Westmoreland connection, we face complete ruin. The home that has sheltered our family for 8 generations will be lost. The tenants who depend upon us will be displaced. All because my daughter prefers playing at science to fulfilling her responsibilities. The weight of his words pressed upon Eleanor's conscience. There must be other solutions, she insisted. Investment opportunities, perhaps, or... There are none, he interrupted flatly. Lord Westmoreland has seen to that. Many potential investors mysteriously withdrew their interest when approached. He is a powerful man with a long memory for slights. Eleanor felt trapped between her newfound freedom and the welfare of innocent tenants, who had no part in her personal rebellion. I need time to consider, she said finally. You have until tomorrow evening, her father replied. Lord Westmoreland departs for his country estate and expects your answer before then. He moved toward the door, leaning heavily on his cane. "Remember, Eleanor, your choices affect far more lives than just your own." Left alone in the study, Eleanor sank into a chair, her mind racing with conflicting emotions. The prospect of returning to her former life, especially under such humiliating conditions, filled her with dread. Yet could she justify her personal freedom at the cost of others' welfare? A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Alexander stood in the doorway, concern evident in his expression. "Forgive the intrusion. Your godmother noticed your distress and thought you might welcome." He hesitated. "That is, she suggested you might need a friend." "Please come in," Eleanor said, grateful for his presence. As he joined her by the fireplace, she found herself relating the entirety of her father's ultimatum, including Lord Westmoreland's apparent sabotage of potential financial solutions. "Such manipulation is unconscionable," Alexander observed, his voice tight with controlled anger. "To deliberately orchestrate financial ruin as leverage for a marriage proposal borders on criminal." "Yet effective," Eleanor replied bleakly. "If I refuse, dozens of families who have served the Blackwood estate for generations will suffer." Alexander paced the small study, his scientific mind clearly working through the problem methodically. "There must be an alternative," he insisted. "Some investment opportunity beyond Westmoreland's influence, perhaps foreign rather than domestic." "In less than 3 months?" Eleanor shook her head. "Even if such an opportunity existed, my father would likely reject it out of pride and traditional thinking." Alexander stopped his pacing, turning to her with sudden intensity. "What if there were another alliance, one that offered financial stability without requiring the surrender of your intellectual freedom?" Eleanor looked up, confused. "What do you mean?" He knelt before her chair, taking her hands in his with uncharacteristic boldness. "Eleanor, I have respected our scholarly friendship too greatly to presume upon it, but I can no longer remain silent. These past weeks have shown me that the connection between us extends far beyond scientific collaboration." Her heart began to race as she recognized the direction of his words. "I had planned to speak with more preparation," he continued earnestly, "but circumstances forced my hand. My recent expedition findings have secured my position with the Society permanently, along with a substantial research endowment. While my resources cannot match Westmoreland's vast holdings, they would suffice to address your father's immediate financial crisis." "Alexander," Eleanor whispered, scarcely believing what she was hearing. "I am asking for your hand." "Eleanor," he said simply, "not as a financial transaction or social arrangement, but as a partnership of minds and hearts. I love your brilliant mind, your courageous spirit, and the extraordinary woman you have become. I would never ask you to abandon your scientific pursuits. Indeed, I would consider it my privilege to advance them alongside my own." Tears filled Eleanor's eyes as the full import of his proposal registered. "You would do this, take on my family's financial burdens, for me?" "I would do far more," he replied with gentle fervor, "but I would never want you to accept from obligation what should only be given from love. If your heart cannot return my feelings, then we shall find another solution to your father's predicament." Eleanor studied his face, the earnest grey eyes that had first engaged with her as an intellectual equal, the strong features that had become increasingly dear to her, the expression of sincere devotion he now made no attempt to conceal. "I need no time to know my heart," she said softly. "It has been yours since you first spoke to me of orchids rather than ornaments, of ideas rather than appearances. I love you, Alexander, and would be honoured to become your wife, not from obligation, but from the deepest affection and respect." His face transformed with joy as he raised her hands to his lips. "Then we shall face Lord Westmoreland together," he declared, "and offer your father an alternative that preserves both his estate and your freedom." Spring sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows of the small chapel on the Thornfield estate, casting colourful patterns across the gathered people. Unlike the grand cathedral that would have hosted Eleanor's marriage to Lord Westmoreland, with hundreds of onlookers and fancy pageantry, this ceremony welcomed only those whose presence truly mattered. Lady Josephine, the Earl of Blackwood, still somewhat confused by the proceedings, a handful of Alexander's scientific colleagues, and the loyal Meredith, who cried openly with happiness. Eleanor wore not the elaborate white satin and Brussels lace that had been made for her ducal wedding, but a simple gown of sky-blue silk adorned only with fresh flowers from Lady Josephine's glass garden. Around her throat hung her mother's pendant compass, a gift Alexander had discovered among Catherine Blackwood's scientific instruments and had fixed as a wedding present. A reminder, he had told her when giving it, that you have always possessed the means to find your true direction. The old vicar, who had known Lady Josephine since childhood, conducted the ceremony with gentle dignity, his words emphasizing partnership and mutual respect rather than female obedience. When Alexander and Eleanor exchanged vows, they added promises of their own creation, to honor each other's minds as well as hearts, to support each other's growth rather than limit it, to build a life of shared purpose and discovery. The Earl of Blackwood, watching his daughter's radiant face as she spoke these unusual vows, found himself remembering his late wife's similar expression during their early courtship, before the constraints of aristocratic marriage had dimmed her joy. For the first time, he allowed himself to wonder whether, in enforcing traditional expectations, he had accidentally diminished the very qualities that had first drawn him to Catherine. The modest wedding breakfast that followed in Lady Josephine's glass garden reflected the intellectual character of the gathering. Conversations ranged from plant classification to star observations, from rock theories to big ideas, all conducted with the lively engagement of minds freed from fake social constraints. Eleanor moved among the guests with natural grace, no longer performing the role of aristocratic hostess but genuinely connecting with each person present. When she finally joined Alexander beside the blooming orchid display, he gazed at her with clear adoration. "Are you happy, Mrs. Halloway?" he asked softly, the name still new and wonderful on his lips. "Profoundly," she replied, her eyes showing the depth of her contentment, though I confess to some worry about our journey. India seems very far from all I've known. Alexander's recent appointment as the Royal Botanical Society's lead researcher for the Himalayan expedition had come with the unprecedented permission to include his scientifically accomplished wife as a full member of the research team, a decision that had caused considerable controversy within the society, but had ultimately been approved by the more progressive faction. "We need not go if you've changed your mind," he assured her. "The society has offered other positions in Cornwall or Scotland." Eleanor shook her head decisively. "My worry comes from natural caution, not reluctance. The opportunity to document previously unclassified alpine species, particularly the variants of our Kashmir orchids, is too extraordinary to decline." Her eyes sparkled with excitement. "Besides, I've spent my entire life within the confines of English society. It's time my horizons expanded beyond these shores." Their departure from England 2 weeks later marked the beginning of a journey that would transform not only their scientific understanding, but their conception of human possibility. The research outpost established near the Himalayan foothills became their home for the next 18 months, a simple but comfortable dwelling that combined Alexander's practical experience with Eleanor's organizational efficiency. The local villagers, initially startled by the presence of a European woman among the scientific team, gradually accepted Eleanor as she demonstrated both respect for their customs and genuine interest in their botanical knowledge. The village elders, recognizing her careful attention to their traditional plant remedies, eventually shared medicinal wisdom passed down through generations, information they had withheld from previous, less culturally sensitive expeditions. Eleanor's detailed documentation of these traditional applications alongside scientific classification created an unprecedented bridge between Western scientific methodology and indigenous knowledge systems. Her illustrated book on the subject, jointly authored with Alexander, and including full credit to the village healers who had shared their expertise, would eventually revolutionize botanical pharmacology and earn recognition from scientific societies across Europe. The letters that flowed between the Himalayan outpost and Thornfield Cottage kept Lady Josephine informed of their discoveries while providing Eleanor with news from England, including the gradual improvement in the Blackwood estate's fortunes as Alexander's mining innovations proved successful beyond even his projections. Most surprising were the increasingly cordial letters from her father, whose initial reluctant acceptance of her unconventional marriage had gradually evolved into genuine respect, as the scientific community's recognition of her work reflected glory on the Blackwood name, albeit in an unexpected manner. "My dear daughter," he wrote 6 months into her expedition, "Lady Melbourne made a point of approaching me at the King's reception to inquire about your Himalayan research. Her nephew, at the Royal Society, apparently speaks most highly of your methodological innovations. I find myself in the unusual position of discussing botanical classification at diplomatic functions. a subject about which I remain woefully ignorant, but increasingly proud to claim family connection. On a clear autumn day, as Eleanor carefully sketched a previously undocumented orchid variant discovered at the highest elevation yet recorded for such a species, she reflected on the extraordinary path that had led her to this mountainside. Alexander worked nearby, meticulously recording soil composition and atmospheric conditions, his scientific precision complementing her artistic documentation. "I've been thinking," he said, looking up from his measurements, "about expanding our expedition eastward next season. There are reports of unique floral adaptations in the eastern valleys that might correlate with our findings here." Eleanor nodded thoughtfully, adding delicate detail to the orchid's distinctive stamen structure. The comparative analysis would be valuable, though we should consider returning to England briefly before undertaking another extended expedition. "You miss home?" Alexander asked gently. "Not in the way you might think," she replied, setting down her pencil to meet his gaze. "I find myself wanting to share what we've discovered, not just through correspondence and specimens, but through lectures and demonstrations. The Society's publications reach only a limited audience." Alexander's expression brightened with understanding. "You're thinking of Lady Josephine's scientific salons?" "Yes, but expanded, accessible to women beyond aristocratic circles." Her eyes lit with purpose. "Imagine educational presentations where working women, governesses, teachers, even shopkeepers' daughters, might gain exposure to scientific principles. Knowledge should not be confined to those born to privilege." Alexander studied her with admiration. "You never cease to push boundaries, do you? First your own, then scientific classification, and now educational access." "Is that disapproval I hear?" she asked, though his expression suggested otherwise. "Quite the contrary," he replied warmly. "It's one of the countless reasons I love you. While others see walls, you envision doorways." 6 months later, their expedition complete, Eleanor stood at the railing of the ship carrying them back to England, watching the coastline emerge from the morning mist. Alexander joined her, his arms slipping naturally around her waist. "Nervous?" he inquired, sensing her tension. "A little," she admitted. "We return as very different people than those who departed. England itself may appear different through your transformed perspective," he suggested. "The boundaries that once seemed insurmountable may now appear merely arbitrary." Eleanor smiled at the insight. "You're right, of course. The true borders were never geographical, but within my own understanding of what was possible." Their return to London created a modest sensation in scientific circles. The Royal Botanical Society hosted a special presentation of their findings, with Eleanor becoming the first woman formally invited to address the assembled membership. Her poised delivery and meticulous research commanded respect even from previous skeptics, while Alexander's evident pride in his wife's accomplishments set a new standard for scholarly partnership. The Scientific Education Society for Women held its inaugural meeting 6 months later in a modest but well-appointed building purchased with the combined support of the Earl of Blackwood's endowment and Lady Josephine's considerable donation. Eleanor, as founding director, had designed a curriculum that balanced theoretical knowledge with practical application, while Alexander contributed both scientific expertise and connections to ensure graduates found meaningful employment opportunities. On a bright spring morning, Eleanor stood before the assembled first class of 30 young women, daughters of merchants, clerks, skilled tradesmen, and even 2 factory workers of exceptional promise, identified by a progressive factory owner. Their eager faces reflected the same intellectual hunger she had once been forced to satisfy in secret. "Ladies," she began, her voice clear and confident, "conventional wisdom insists that the female mind is unsuited to scientific inquiry. This assertion persists not because of evidence, but because of tradition. A tradition we are gathered here to challenge through rigorous study and demonstrable achievement." She moved among them, making eye contact with each student. "The path will not be easy. Society rarely surrenders its comfortable assumptions without resistance. You will face skepticism, dismissal, and perhaps outright hostility. Yet each calculation you master, each experiment you complete, each hypothesis you test erodes the foundations of such baseless limitations." At the back of the room, Alexander watched with quiet pride as his wife illuminated possibilities these young women, had never been encouraged to imagine. Beside him stood Lady Josephine, her eyes bright with the satisfaction of witnessing a dream she had nurtured now, blossoming beyond her original vision. Later that evening, in the comfortable study of their London home, Eleanor sat completing her journal entry, while Alexander organised specimens for the next day's advanced botany lecture. The domesticity of the scene belied its revolutionary nature. Husband and wife engaged as intellectual equals, their professional and personal lives seamlessly integrated. As Eleanor prepared for bed that night, she caught sight of her reflection in the mirror. The woman who gazed back bore little resemblance to the perfectly groomed aristocratic daughter who had once stood at the threshold of a grand ballroom, awaiting her predetermined fate. This woman's eyes held wisdom earned through experience, her hands showed the honourable marks of meaningful work, and her expression reflected the serenity of authentic purpose. "What are you thinking?" Alexander asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. Eleanor smiled, turning from the mirror to face the man who had seen her true self when others saw only a social position. "I was remembering something my mother wrote in her journal. True happiness comes not from meeting others' expectations, but from exceeding our own." Alexander drew her into his embrace. "By that measure, you must be extraordinarily happy indeed." "Beyond anything I once believed possible," she confirmed softly. "What I once thought my greatest misfortune, that night of public rejection, proved the first step toward discovering my authentic self. Sometimes one must ride directly into the storm to find clear skies beyond." Outside their window, spring rain began to fall. Not the threatening tempest Eleanor had faced on her initial flight from London society, but a gentle shower promising renewal and growth. Like the Himalayan orchids they had studied together, she had found the precise conditions needed to flourish: freedom to explore, courage to question, and love that amplified rather than diminished her unique nature.